All right, today we're diving into the ancient and honestly kind of surprising world of ritual purity. We're going to unpack a sermon that explores this massive biblical divide between what was considered clean and unclean.
So let's start with a wild idea from the Old Testament. I mean, just imagine this. A priest shows up at your door, inspects the walls, and then declares that your house, the building itself, has a leprous disease. Yeah, according to the sermon we're looking at, this was a real thing. Your entire home could be declared ritually unclean.
And you know, this whole idea of a sick house, that's just a tiny piece of a huge, incredibly detailed system of purity laws. These rules touch pretty much every single aspect of daily life, drawing a very clear line in the sand between what was pure and what wasn't.
So what do we even mean by unclean? This is absolutely crucial to get right off the bat. We are not talking about hygiene or being physically dirty. The original Hebrew word points to a state of ritual impurity. It was a condition that for a time would separate you from your community and from participating in worship.
Now, here's the thing that might be surprising. Look at how totally normal many of these sources of uncleanliness were. According to this sermon's take on Leviticus, everyday life events like childbirth or menstruation could put you in a temporary state of ritual impurity. Same goes for something as unavoidable as contact with a dead body for burial, or even just touching someone who was already considered unclean.
And listen, these weren't just suggestions. The consequences were, well, they were severe. This wasn't some minor social faux pas. As the source points out, the law was clear. If you ignored your unclean state and took part in certain sacred rituals, you would be cut off from your people. And that phrase, it means total social and religious exile. You are out.
To really get a handle on just how serious this system was, the sermon zooms in on one specific condition, what the Bible calls leprosy. This was more than just a terrible physical illness. It was seen as the absolute ultimate state of ritual uncleanliness.
The process described here was basically a kind of social death, and it happened step by step. First, a priest made the official declaration. From that moment on, you were banished, forced to live totally cut off from everyone. You had to literally shout, "Unclean, unclean," wherever you went, just to warn people to stay away. Even your clothes were seen as so contaminated they had to be burned.
And let's be crystal clear about this. Any physical contact was completely forbidden. According to the law, if you so much as touched a person with leprosy, or even an item of their clothing, that state of uncleanliness would instantly transfer to you. It created this absolute uncrossable barrier, a life lived completely alone.
Okay, so you have this entire rigid system in place. But then, as the sermon argues, the New Testament comes along and introduces a massive, radical shift in thinking. The whole definition of what it means to be clean and unclean is about to get turned completely on its head. You see, instead of focusing on all these external rules, what you touch, what you eat, the sermon explains that the focus takes a hard turn inward. It starts looking not at the body, but at the heart. The radical new idea was that real purity actually comes from inside a person.
And this chart lays out the change perfectly. The Old Testament law, it was all about the external, your actions, your food, your physical condition. But the New Testament teaching, as the pastor sees it, shifts the whole game to the internal, what you believe, your faith, the spiritual state of your heart. Suddenly, being unclean is less about a physical problem and way more about a spiritual one.
The sermon really hinges on this verse from 1 Corinthians as proof. The argument is that an entire family can be considered holy or clean because of the faith of just one parent. The pastor really emphasizes that the word unclean used here to describe the children isn't about a disease, it's about the spiritual state of unbelief. Purity is now tied to your relationship with God.
So it's one thing to have a new idea, but how does it actually play out in the real world? Well, the sermon points to the actions of Jesus as the ultimate demonstration of this brand new spiritual reality.
And this right here is the big flip. This is the game changer. Under the old rules, impurity was contagious. The unclean contaminated the clean. But in the New Testament examples, holiness becomes contagious. Instead of Jesus getting contaminated by touching an unclean person, that person becomes clean because of his touch. The whole flow of power is reversed.
And you just can't find a more powerful example than the story of Jesus and the leper. He does the one thing that was absolutely positively forbidden. He reaches out his hand and he touches the man. And in that one moment, instead of the impurity spreading to him, his purity flows to the leper and the man is healed instantly.
So where does all this lead?
Well, it all builds to the final major takeaway from the sermon, a completely new definition of what it even means to be pure.
At the end of the day, the central message is this: true purity gets completely redefined. It's no longer about whether you meticulously followed all the external rules about food or physical contact. It becomes a matter of your internal faith, of what you believe in your heart.
So really, the whole system just shifts. The goal isn't about building walls anymore, trying to protect yourself from getting contaminated by the outside world. The new focus is all about cultivating and nurturing an internal faith, because that's now seen as the real source of spiritual purity.
And that kind of leaves us with a question to chew on, right? The context was ancient, sure, but how do these deep, powerful ideas of clean versus unclean, of us versus them, still echo in our world today? How might they still, maybe quietly, shape the way we see people who are different from us?